Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to continue the series on the London system with one of the most aggressive and in my opinion best setups for black. The Benoni setup, or the setup with the early c5, doesn't necessarily have to be a Benoni. That will depend on what white does. But if white plays the best and the most active way and keeps playing for the biggest advantage and for a win, then it is going to be a Benoni by transposition. Okay, so we are going to be looking at all the options white has and all the options black has, and as opposed to the previous videos, the Queen's Indian setup, the King's Indian setup, and the D5 for black, this is much more active and much more complicated. It's also much harder to play because once black goes for the early c5, white is almost obliged not to play a normal London system anymore. So let's see what happens. After the move d4, let's start here, excuse me. After the move d4, black will continue with knight f6, so we are going to be looking at positions after knight f6, and white now plays the move bishop f4. As I said in the introductory video, I think bishop f4 is much more precise than knight f3 for the reasons mentioned in the previous videos. When it comes to the early c5, it's even more highlighted, and I'm going to show you why. But let me just show you what I'm talking about. So the early c5 is c5 on move 2 for black. Now what this move does two very important things to disrupt white's normal London system plans. First of all, it puts pressure on your center, on the d4 pawn, before you've managed to consolidate with your London system c3, e3 triangle. Secondly, it opens up the queen to the b6 square, looking at the b2 pawn, thus exploiting the fact that the bishop is outside and that it cannot easily defend. I actually had a game in Zagreb Open last December, where in this position my opponent continued with c3, which, as we are going to see, is a huge mistake, which allows queen to b6. I didn't win. He was 21-50. I drew comfortably. I was much better, though. I should have won. So we're going to have a look at all of these options. So what does white do to solve the two problems? You obviously cannot play a normal London system without making a concession. If you try to do it, as we are going to see, if you try to avoid the most active continuation, you will basically give the white pieces to black, and black is going to play with more space, more piece activity, and much more control of the center. Because if you try to play a normal London system, then it's going to be as if white is playing the Slav defense with the bishop on f4 in reverse, if that makes sense in some positions. So the most active way to solve both problems is to continue with the move d5. And now, if you are unfamiliar with the Benoni defense for black, or with what white should be doing against the Benoni, if you have time, watch the playlist I made on the Benoni defense. There you will find all the information you need for setups for both sides. The point is that after white plays the move d5, we now have a typical Benoni pawn structure, and whatever happens in the game, it's going to be a typical Benoni. From here on, there are a couple of options black could choose from. Black could play d6, b5, queen b6. We're going to have a look at all of these moves. The point is, it's no longer going to be a London system. Obviously, your pawn is not on d4 anymore. You are never playing c3 and d3 in these positions, and you've basically conceded to get out of your opening. There are alternatives, though. You could, as white, react to this by taking. You could react by e3. You could also play the mistake c3, which the only time I played this in a tournament game, my opponent played c3. And now, of course, the refutation is queen to b6. And in this position, arguably the best move is queen to b3, and after takes, you can see that there's just a big advantage for black. In my game, my opponent, I believe, played here, takes, he took here. Yes, that's what happened. You can find the game in the Road to GM playlist. So anyway, c3 is a mistake, and black is more than equal after c3. The other continuation, d takes c5, it's is equal. Black has equalized. Knight a6 is the most precise move. You could play check immediately and take the pawn, but knight a6 is the main line. Now knight d4, queen a5 check, c3 or knight c3, queen takes c5, etc., etc. Once again, not the most active continuation for white. Once again, not the normal London system, as you can see, and black has absolutely no issues. The main alternative to d5, as we are going to see, is the move e3. Now this move also has flaws, and we are going to go over all of them. And it has been played on the highest levels. e3 is okay, but d5 still remains the most active continuation. Before we get into that, I want to go over two things. The first thing is, what if white starts with knight f3 instead of bishop f4? Well, if you play knight f3 on move 2, trying to get into the London system one move later, and black now plays the move c5, it's not that easy to get into the London system. The only way to force the London system is to play the move c3. Of course, if you play e3, it's very hard to develop your bishop. But if you play c3, again, we have the same issue, that you're basically handing the white pieces to black. And here, black can simply continue with e6 or b6. Doesn't really matter. They should eventually both be played, I think, if you're playing for a normal Queen's Indian type of setup with black. My preferred way of playing this with black, and I have played this, is b6. Bishop f4, trying to play the London, bishop b7, e3, white has completed his triangle, and now we go for g6. You sort of combine the Queen's Indian and the King's Indian, you go for the double fianchetto, put your pawn on d6 later on, and I personally, I believe that black is slightly better here. The engine thinks it's completely equal, but yeah, in this position, obviously, black has no issues, and it's very easy to play this position for black. There is no London system attack. You don't even have the e5 square. You don't have a kingside attack. Black has two amazing bishops, and I think that there are no issues. So if you start with knight f3, and c5 is played, the only way to get into the London is c3, but that allows this hybrid good setup for black. I believe that c3 shouldn't be played. Therefore, after c5, you should once again continue with d5, and now you do play a normal Benoni. Now b5 can be played going into a sort of Benko gambit or Volga gambit, or more commonly e6. So after c4, ed, cd, d6, knight c3, this is just the main line Benoni defense. Now e4, bishop g7, etc., etc. So if you are starting out with knight f3 on move 2, then you will be forced to play a mainline Benoni, and there's no way to avoid it. You can avoid it by conceding a small disadvantage or complete equality to black. And as I said, if you play this with black, as I do, you are going to be facing c3, and my suggestion is b6 and go for this very, very nice setup in which you have both of your bishops fianchettoed. You close off the position with d6 later on, and white will not have an easy time breaking through. Okay, so I would therefore advise you to just play the move bishop f4 on move 2, so that if you meet c5, you have some options of going into a somewhat usual London system. Okay, one more thing I want to go over before we continue on the main lines is, what if black plays the move c5 straight away, not even giving you the option to play bishop f4? Well, in this position, again, you can force the London system with c3, so we get positions similar to what we saw previously, or you can play the old Benoni. This is the old Benoni. If you want to watch the video on it, I made a full video on the old Benoni. Everything is explained there, by playing d5, and I now, of course, d6, e6, e5, a lot of options, knight f6. Okay, but after c5, if you want to force the London system, then c3, e6, knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, b6. Again, e6 doesn't have to be played, but I think it's most precise. Again, you go for this sort of Queen's Indian type of setup with black, with your bishop on b7. Let's say bishop to d3, you can go d6 here, castles, bishop e7. A very common Queen's Indian setup, which, as you know, I've covered in the previous video. So now the main difference is going to be whether black has played d5 or d6, which means, well, the main difference is whether white can occupy the e5 square or not. Does he want to go for e4? Does he have the isolated d4 pawn, etc.? So watch the previous video in the London system series for more info on this. But as I said, if the immediate c5 is played, My advice, go into the old Benoni. That's much more active, much bigger advantage. After c3, well, that's, I mean, it's kind of passive. You're saying, okay, black, you win, you have the white pieces, you are attacking my center, I'm defending, and I wouldn't recommend this. Okay, now let's look at positions in which d5 is avoided in a bit more depth. Okay, now the main alternative, as I said, is e3, but dc5 is also viable. c3, as we said, a mistake, don't play c3, remember that. Okay, because c3 makes it very hard to defend. Okay, briefly, dc5, I would, for black, recommend knight a6. For white, I would recommend that you don't play dc5, that's just, your center is gone. Queen d4 is the main move, defending the pawn and forcing queen to a5. And now c3 can be played, knight c3 can be played. Knight c3 is slightly trickier because knight c5 and after bishop to d2. I believe that if you're forced to retreat like this, black should have a slight edge. So I would recommend that after queen a5 you play the move c3, which solidifies your center, doesn't give black so many options, defends the b4 square. And after queen c5, e3, e6. Neither side is really afraid of a queen trade. Black should avoid taking here because that would improve white's central control. And also, if let's say black had taken here, you have also freed up the c3 square for the knight, and in this position white indeed would be better with a symmetrical pawn structure, but a much better knight, active bishops, lead in development, and yeah, pleasant. So e6, knight d2, bishop e7, normal development, castles, let's say rook to d1. White could continue with bishop d3, with bishop e2, with bishop c4 even. You could even take on a6, castle, but as I said, black has absolutely no issues. Black has a free hand in the center by playing the move d5. The only issue is the c8 bishop, but that's about to be resolved with a move such as b6. And yeah, I believe I would rather have the black pieces here, but that's me. Okay, the main alternative though is the move e3. And now we are going to look at a couple of thematic positions, which I actually recently had this in my game against Vlatko, my teammate. The main move and the move I would recommend for black is queen to b6. Now this is just the most active, and this is the easiest way to highlight the weakness of white's opening play. So what did white do? White had played the move e3 and bishop f4, leaving b2 unattended, and I've attacked the center and attacked the b2 pawn, so very sensible. Now, there is no alternative to knight c3. If you are unfamiliar with this position, then knight c3 is pretty hard to find. I'm going to show you some patterns which are hopefully going to make it easier. Okay, so knight c3. The point is, if the pawn is taken, you have the move knight b5, and black has to be very careful. Now, I'm going to show you my game against Vlatko, which was done in 3 minutes. I'm going to show you a forced draw in this position. So, black can decide to take on b2. I had decided to go for this draw because I was leading in our match, and I didn't have time, I had to work. So yeah, so I decided to go for a quick draw, and I also wanted to see if he's going to try to avoid it, because there is a way to play for a win with white, but it's very complicated. I'd actually prepared it before the game, so I was ready for him deviating from this draw. The first draw is knight to b5, and now the only move for black is knight to d5. And yeah, now if rook to b1 is played, as was played in the game, then that's a draw. Queen a2, 2 pawns up for black, but white has a perpetual attack on the queen, and that's a draw. This is how our game had ended. If after knight to b5, knight to d5, white wants to play for a win, then he plays the move a3. And in this position, and this gets very complex for both sides, black has only one move, that's a6, because the queen is now lost. You don't have a retreat square anymore. In this position, a6 is played, rook to b1, queen to a2, okay, queen to c1, and now, of course, threatening simply rook to a1. There is no more escape. So you take a b5, rook to a1, queen to a1, queen to a1, and now you go e5. And this I'd actually been preparing this for Latko because I'd expected him to go for a win. He was down in the match. But I was quite confident with the black pieces here. I think it's very hard to play for white with the king in the center and the entire king side undeveloped. So the game should continue if white knows what he is doing. D takes e5 and c4, blunting the bishop, making it very hard for him to develop. Queen d4 is the best move, and now knight takes f4, queen takes f4, bishop a3. And in my opinion, black has a significant advantage. In reality, it's a forced draw 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. There have been several games from this position. Yeah, 3 more games from this position. All 3 ended in a draw. So this is a 13-14 move forced line, which you simply have to know if you want to play the London system. And if you want to play for a win in this position after queen takes b2. Because after queen b6 and knight c3, black can decide whether he wants to take on b2 or not. So when he takes on b2, you have to play knight b5. Nothing else works. Okay, so knight b5. Black has to play knight d5. And now, yeah, now if you play rook b1, it's a draw. If your opponent is much higher rated, fine. If your opponent is 800, then yeah, you want to play for a win. So you're going to have to play a3. So learn this forced line, which I showed you, starting with 6 a3, and try to look for chances for white. I'm preparing this for black, and I'm looking for chances for black. I'm sorry, guys who only play the white side of the London system. I believe black is better here. Therefore, I believe that c5 is the best move for black on move 2. Therefore, I believe that white should play d5 and not e3. And this is, in my opinion, the refutation of the move e3. Because I think even if white does play a3, black is slightly better. And you can check out the lines for yourself. All right. So the alternative after queen b6, knight c3, I don't have to take on b2, obviously. I can do something else. So in this position, black has several other options. CD4 is an option. A6 is an option. So A6 simply preventing knight to b5. This is a tricky move if white doesn't know one simple pattern, and that pattern is A3. A3 prevents queen takes b2, because if you play queen takes b2 now, I play knight a4 and win your queen. The queen has no escape squares. Okay, so therefore a6 a trick trying to win the b2 pawn, a3 a trick defending the b2 pawn, and now the game continues normally. One of the best moves is d5, and after d5, as I said, it seems to me that black is playing the white pieces, having a broad center, pawns on c5, d5, sort of a queen's gambit declined position. With the bishop on f4 for some reason, in which I would again prefer to have the black pieces. Everything seems loose in the white position, so even a6 is okay. Still believe queen b6 is better. Queen takes b2 is better. Okay, the other option I wanted to show you is cd4, and after, of course, e takes d4. Now it's fairly obvious that the London system is all gone. No more London system. Again, after this exchange, you play the move a6. White plays a3, again the same trick, queen takes b2, knight a4, winning the queen, and again d5. And here white cannot really claim any advantage. For example, bishop to d3, knight to c6, normal development, knight g2 e2. If you go knight f3, then bishop g4 is very annoying, so knight g2 e2 is much better. Again, absolutely no issues for black. Black could play bishop g4, black could also play e6, which is a bit more precise. You can expand with queen d8, b5. Later on, bishop b7, e5. You want to prepare. Play with an isolated queen's pawn on the e4 square. Black has a very, very, very pleasant position. Okay, so avoiding d5, in my opinion, is not a good idea. It is if you have something specific prepared, if you know your opponent well. If you are 2500 or 2600, then okay. But I believe that you need to play for advantage with white. Therefore, we are going to be focusing on the best move for white, and that's d5. By far the most active move, playing for advantage, claiming central space, ruining black's pawn structure inevitably. This will lead to a better pawn structure for white. So I know it's a ton of theory. I know it's not the London system. I know it's the Benoni, but learn the Benoni defense. Learn what you can do from here to be able to fight for advantage in the London, regardless of what is played. regardless of what's played against you. Okay, so the first thing we are going to look at is, in my opinion, the best move. Again, queen to b6. Queen to b6 again puts pressure on the b2 pawn, and again, knight to c3 is the best move. Now, this position, this exact position, has been played about 500 times, but most often it comes from the Trumpovsky attack. The same position, just with the bishop on g5. So just give me a second. So yeah, in this position, this usually comes from d4, knight f6, bishop g5. So the Trumpovsky c5, d5, queen b6, and it's called the poison pawn variation of the Trumpovsky, of the Trumpovsky attack for white. But once this move, knight c3, queen takes b2 is played, and white plays the move bishop d2, which is the only move, it doesn't matter whether the bishop came from f4 or g5, the bishop has transposed, the position, I'm sorry, has transposed. So this is basically the poisoned pawn variation of the Trumpovsky attack, not the London system anymore, not the Benoni, but the Trumpovsky. Still, one of the most thematic variations after d5, which you absolutely have to know. So as a London system player against c5, you have to know the Trumpovsky, you have to know the Benoni. I know it's complicated, but c5 is the best, most active response for black. So get rid of that, everything else will be easier. In this position, white is threatening to gain a tempo with rook b1, force the queen away, win the queen. So black plays queen to b6. And now white combines a Benoni type expansion in the center with e4. Best move. Okay. After e4, black needs to start developing, so black plays the move d6. There is no alternative, basically. You need to start blocking white's pawns, you need to block the e5 pawn, and as you know in the Benoni, if you don't, please watch the series in the Benoni. In the Benoni, white wants to play the move e5 to attack the d6 weakness, to break open the position. Ideally, that should be done when the black king is still in the center, although in the main lines of the Benoni, that's not possible. So here, white continues with f4, again, very sensible, aggressive. Okay, and black can choose between e6 and e5 here. That's not a pleasant choice in my opinion. In this position, of course, black is a pawn up, but I'm not sure who would like to have the black pieces here. This just seems very, very dangerous. All of white's pieces are better than black's pieces. This bishop and this rook are not going anywhere anytime soon. It seems very hard to develop. So e6 undermines the center, and after e6, rook to b1 is theory. Queen to c7. Queen d8 is also possible. Queen c7 is a bit better, keeping an eye on the b7 pawn and on the c5 pawn. Bishop b5 check, developing with tempo. Knight b to d7. Bishop d7 is also possible. In both cases, you might be wondering, why not bishop d7 to defend e6 to prevent d, e, f, e? Well, the bishop is pinned, so even after bishop d7, this is possible, ruining black's pawn structure. Therefore, knight b to d7 is the more active move. Still d e6, f e6, and now you can see that white obviously has compensation for the pawn. Your plan is simple: knight f3 castles. Okay, no issues there, and then just f5 or e5, and normal Benoni kingside pawn storm, and very, very easy to play for the pawn. So for example, knight f3, a6, queen e2, bishop e7, castles, very easy play. Okay, so the alternative for black after the move f4 is the move e5. In this position, you want to take that. You don't want to close the position down. If you take en passant, then that becomes way more pleasant. This is actually a common pattern in the Benoni, that if you take here, the bishop takes or the pawn takes, and black has a bit more control. Therefore, after the move e5, the best way to play is for long-term control and long-term weaknesses and a long-term advantage with fe. And after d, well, you have a passed pawn. Of course, if black manages to get a blockade in with, I don't know, knight e6, knight c7, knight e8, knight d6, then fine. e4 is a weakness, the passed pawn is not going anywhere, but that's not that easy to do. Knight f3, knight bd7, for example, bishop c4, a6, a4. a4, whenever a6 is played, just play a4 in the Benoni. That stops b5. And yeah, I think, of course, this is a balanced position. Black has a pawn, white has enough for the pawn. If the pieces get traded off, black wins. If black is not careful in the middle game, white wins because he has way more activity. Again, a very interesting position in which white is playing for an advantage. He's not scared of giving up the pawn for the initiative, and he's just pleasant. It's more pleasant to play white in this position. Okay, after d5 though, black doesn't have to play queen b6. That's just, in my opinion, the best move. Black can also play in the old Benoni fashion, in the Czech Benoni fashion, or in the Benko Gambit fashion. d6 is the main move, and structures are going to go into the Czech Benoni or closed Benoni more often than not, because e5 is the most logical follow-up. Before we get on to d6, let's look at b5. b5 is the Benko or the Volga. It's a sort of pseudo Benko Gambit. It's not really a Benko Gambit because there's no pawn on c4. Okay, in this position, there are a couple of options. You can play a4. You can play f3 with the idea of e4 defending the d5 pawn. I wouldn't recommend those. I don't think they are as good. c4 is, in my opinion, the best attempt for an advantage for white, and you're basically transposing into the normal Benko with the bishop on f4 for some reason, but that's okay. This bishop is very active. So in this position, bc4, first of all, is just a bad move. Knight c3, huge control. This pawn is about to drop. There's no way to defend it. So black doesn't really want to play bc4. Just remember that after bc4, you go knight c3. And after g6, going into normal Benoni, e4, d6, knight f3, knight bd7, bishop c4. White is great here. You can follow up with e5, castle, rook e1, e5, and white's position is way more pleasant. Therefore, after c4, black should continue with b4, but this leads to different types of issues. This pawn structure can be easily undermined. Black's queen side is undeveloped, so a3 is a very powerful idea. Continue with developing. You could go h3 here. That's a good move, stopping bishop g4. But I believe that that's unnecessary. Just knight f3 is, I think, practically the best move. d6. And now a3. a3 undermines the structure immediately. So after e5, which, well, is fighting for central control, you now take en passant, fe, ab, cb, e3. I think white has a way more pleasant position. Black obviously has this advanced pawn, which is Schrodinger's pawn, a strength and a weakness at the same time. But he also has these hanging pawns in the center, which are very weak. And he also has no play. All the pieces are undeveloped. He only has the knight on f6, which doesn't really have any sensible squares. So, I mean, I just like white here after c4. It's not easy to play, but I like white. Open, semi-open a-file, queen a4 check on the cards, maybe knight d2, knight c3, maybe b3 to lock this pawn down and put pressure on it, maybe even rook a4 to put pressure on the pawn immediately. Who knows? I mean, there are decent options for white in this position. So remember that after d5, if b5 is played, sort of Benko Gambit style, you have three options. Oh, excuse me. Let me just turn off the sound on my phone. Sorry about that. I forgot. Okay, so after b5, remember that a4, c4, or f3 are ideas. c4 is the best move. Okay, and now after d5, the most common move for black is d6. And perhaps d6 is the trickiest move to play against, because d6 leads to the closed Benoni or the Czech Benoni, and that's counterintuitive, in my opinion, for both colors. If you're unfamiliar with closed positions, this is going to be hard. Okay, so white has two options, either knight c3 or c4. Again, normal Benoni dilemma. Do you want to expand before you play knight c3, or do you want to play knight c3? I believe that knight c3 is just an inferior move. I mean, okay, you can play it. Knight c3, e5, as I said, going into the Czech Benoni. You don't want to go d, because if d takes e, bishop takes e, e4, that's slightly imprecise. You have once again liberated this bishop. Black has a bit more central control. So after e5, you either go bishop g5 or bishop d2. You retreat this bishop. And I believe that you want to have the pawn on c4. Okay, The engine says the moves are about equal, but playing with c4 is much easier. Why? Because if black's pawn chain is facing this way and this way, that means that black has two possible pawn breaks, f5 and b5. For the moment, the pawn is not on e4 yet. It very well could get onto e4, but with the knight on c3, it's very hard to play c4. So playing with c4 is just easier because it naturally prevents the move b5, and this is no mistake, of course. Knight c3 is not a mistake, but it's easier to play with the pawn on c4. So let's focus on that. So after c4, again, e5. Again, you don't want to take en passant, liberate black's position. You play bishop to d2, simply retreating. And now, yeah, knight to e4, for example, can be played, which may seem annoying, giving up the bishop, but the position is closed, so it's questionable which minor piece is better. I would actually rather have knights here, especially, for example, knight to c3. If knight takes d2, queen takes d2, for example, g6, which is a normal Czech Benoni plan, white plays e4. And now it's going to be a matter of who plays the pawn break first. Obviously, white wants to go f4 or b4, black wants to go b5 or f5. For this position and for positions similar to this, look at the video or watch the video on the Czech Benoni, and that's much more in depth, and you will find everything you need in there. So to sum this up, after c5, if you want to play for advantage, play d5 with white. There is no other way to claim any advantage. As I said, after e3, black has forced draws, black has small advantages. It's much more complicated. d5 requires time to learn, and you are going to be required to know different types of setups. So if black plays queen b6, you are going to have to know the poisoned pawn variation of the Trompovsky. If black plays the move b5, you are going to have to be familiar with the Benko Gambit type of ideas. If black plays the move d6, you will have to know the closed or Czech Benoni. But I'm sorry, that's just, it's like that. If you want to have an advantage against c5, you have to know these three things. Okay, let me know what you think about the video. I hope you liked it. Hope it helps. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I will try to answer them. And stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.